Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hypergamous Journey. My name is Denise. At this channel, we discuss dating advice for mature women, mature in mindset, mature in age. It's been a minute. I am back. I would like to share my thoughts on One Love, the Bob Marley story, and in particular, focusing in on Mrs. Rita Marley. I recently saw a YouTube video about an award that she received in Jamaica. An award that she received in Jamaica, and she was in a wheelchair and looked a little frail. And then I had to remember she's in her 80s. Because the footage that I had been seeing on YouTube and on the internet has her as a woman who's in her 50s and 60s. And so I had this image of her in that way. And so the reality is that she's in her 80s and Mr. Marley would be in his 80s as well. I think she was a little bit older than him, so maybe his late 70s. But the point is that these are people who are our elders. And I wanted to draw some similarities between Mrs. Marley, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and Mrs. I think her name is Medgar Evers' widow. And I don't have any, this is allegedly, first of all, allegedly, and I think maybe in Dr. King's case and in Bob's case for sure, the men definitely had affairs on their wives. And so this is in all due respect to all women. But I wanted to draw the similarities between these women who were married to extraordinary men and who helped these men become extraordinary. Like they had something inside of them that was innately there, they were born with, but these women were behind the scenes and sometimes side by side with them building. And how we do that, and we make a decision as women whether to stick it out with the men that we're married to or go on our merry way through divorce. Or we still stay married, but both people are living separate lives. And the word that came to mind for me was long suffering. Long suffering. Long suffering. Women who would, in Rita's case, started out as backup singers to Bob and going on the road and struggling with him until he got to some form of notoriety and fame outside of Jamaica, in Europe, I think first, and then the United States, and how she rode that with him, and how she struggled, and the traumas that she had, and then the traumas that he had, and then the trauma bonding that took place between the two of them. I think both of them were kind of orphaned as young people, maybe as teenagers, 12, 13, maybe younger. Both of them were orphaned, and they were there for each other as emotional support. And Bob, shared his dream of being a singer and doing that as a musician, singer, wanting to spread love and peace. And she could sing. And so they blended together, became partners, and grew together. I'm told that she had a child already. And then she had 3 or 4 with him. And then he had all of these outside children. And with Dr. King and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, of course, they had their 4 children together, but there allegedly were affairs with women on the road. And how long suffering that is. And then Medgar Evers, I'm not really sure if there was a lot of talk about him having affairs on the road, but allegedly, I wouldn't doubt if he did, because, regardless of the stature, the status of the man, there are always women who want what you have. Because from the outside, it appears to be better than what they have. And especially if they don't have a man at all. So you have a rock star or a musical legend. And at the time, he wasn't a musical legend. He just became popular in Europe, and then he became a rock star. But he had humble beginnings. The same with Dr. King. He had a pretty solid middle class life in the Black community, and maybe, outside of the Black community as well. But we're talking about, when was he born? In the 1930s? So, and growing up in the 50s and the 60s as a college student. And, he was gifted and talented, they knew, within the Black community and maybe a little bit in the white community, but still humble beginnings in very racist, segregated the United States. And then goes off to Boston College or Boston University, a prestigious university in America, and meets Coretta Scott King, who was studying music and becoming an opera singer. And I saw a movie that she introduced him to politics. So it wasn't something that he was naturally interested in, that she introduced him to social justice and things of that nature. And then he took off with that, and then having the natural ability to speak and orate. Again, humble beginnings, partnered with a woman who got him into social justice issues, and coupled with his innate ability to speak, debate. He was smart too, so I'm not saying he wasn't. But the similarity in the line between the two women and the men that they married and helped build with, and the alleged affairs with Dr. King, and definitely documented with Bob, the affairs with women, and neither one of them making the decision to stand by their men, and women propositioning their husbands on the road with social justice and the civil rights movement, and is big and great, and as many people of color that benefited from that don't admit that they benefited from that, but they did. People of color benefited from the civil rights movement, and it wasn't a movement that was originally for African Americans or Black Americans or whatever, Negro at the time that we're called, but it was originally for us, and other people of all races and colors benefited from and still benefit today. And Bob Marley, in entertainment and in music, and what he became and women were doing to get next to him. And I'm going to leave Myrlie Evers and Medgar Evers out of it, because I don't really know that much about them, except that there was a school named, there's a part of the City University of New York system. There's a college in Brooklyn named after Medgar Evers called Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn. So that's pretty much all I know about him. So I'm going to leave them off my list, but definitely the similarities between Mrs. Coretta Scott King and Mrs. Rita Marley and their husbands, even though they're in different arenas different arenas, the music, entertainment field for Bob, and the political, social justice, civil rights movement for Dr. King, but movements that moved people either in reconciliation and peace or division. But ultimately, in the end, after they're dead and gone, it's in peace and in reconciliation, generally speaking. But focusing in on the women who met them when they were pretty much nothing and nobodies, relatively speaking. And the women, and these women stood behind them, encouraged them in their dreams, and strategically decided to stay married to them because they love them in spite of their frailties as human beings, as men. And after they were gone, dead and gone, continued to work on their behalf and build up their legacy so that they would have monuments, physical buildings and structures that their children's children, that their children and children's children, children's children can look at and say, that's dedicated to my great-great-grandfather. That's dedicated to my great-great-grandfather. So imagine women who lose their husbands, who have these children that they are responsible for raising, continuing to raise, getting them through young adulthood while you're still grieving the loss of your husband, and everybody else in the world is grieving the loss of your husband. And then when all of the lights are turned off, the public lights, the media lights are turned off, you have to continue on with your life, raising your children, teaching them right from wrong, keeping them out of harm's way, keeping them from going in the direction of drugs and alcohol, or people trying to use them, use you in your grieving time. And even, your family coming together as a covering for you to trying to protect you from them, from the media. But also there's families, your family members who are close to you who might be trying to use you or take from you as well. Both women. That is for both women. But then things settle down and they're thinking, well, how do I make it so that Bob's work is not in vain? How do I make it work so that there's a monument to my husband in the town in which he grew up, Dr. King? And if you don't have any knowledge on really how to do that, because you don't really run in those circles, you don't really have that network, you have to start out from the ground up, finding people who can advocate on your behalf, who know people, who know people, who know people in the higher up, in the hierarchy of social society, in socially, presidents, prime ministers, and just on and on and on and on. And you have to work as the wife of these great men. These women are great in their own right. These women are great in their own right, and they have to figure out, contact, communicate, work from year to year, month to month, day to day, to build a legacy for their deceased husbands. And people telling you, what are you doing? It's not right. Who cares? And there are people who are promising they'll help you. But if you do this, if you raise, for example, $1 million, we will match you with $2 million. But it takes $50 million to build a building, let's say in Atlanta, for Dr. King, the King Center. It takes $50 million to build it, but you only have $1 million, and you got to keep plugging along to get the 50 million, and then they'll match your 50, so you'll have 100. And I'm sure the same thing or something similar happened with Mrs. Rita Marley, and even Rohan. And I think she's not really his biological mother. I don't think. I could be wrong, but he said when his father died, they had very little money because that was the last thing on Bob's mind. Obviously, it was women and music and touring and bringing home his babies to Rita to raise. And she could have said, no, I'm not going to do that. But obviously she has a big heart and a love of children, and she knew it wasn't the children's fault that they were here. So she took in, I believe, if not all of his children, but most of them, somehow or another ended up in her care. Somehow his children ended up in her care, and she raised them all together as siblings. And I don't know if there were any, sibling rivalry. Who knows? But on to the public, it doesn't appear to have been. But I just wanted to talk about these women strategically deciding, I'm not going to divorce my husband because of the babies in Bob's case, the alleged affairs in terms of Dr. King, but these women saw a bigger picture and decided to stay. And then after their husbands died, they continued to work on building their legacy for their children, grandchildren now, and for some of them, great-grandchildren. Some of the Marley kids have grandchildren, which would be Bob's great-grandchildren. Yeah, some of the grandchildren have children, so it would be Bob's great-grandchildren. And Dr. King's kids didn't have any children. Dexter King just died maybe 6 months ago. May he rest in peace. And so they only have one daughter. Martin III has one daughter, and that's it for their line. There are no more other children that we are aware of. But these women decided to stay, and that was their strategy, not only, for love, but strategically for the legacy. And as a result, Cindy Breakspear, who is the girlfriend, or basically just say the mistress of Bob, she doesn't get that title. She's the side chick and he's the wife. And, she may have some feelings about that, and maybe he really did love her, but he didn't love her enough to divorce Mrs. Marley to marry his mistress. And they have a son together, Damian Marley. And all of the children just seem to be musically talented. They each have their own careers, and I'm told are really really talented men and women. The girls not so, they're talented because they were in a group with Ziggy, but they don't do music like that, like the sons do, and still are doing. So yes, that's my take on the women watching One Love. And it just occurred to me the similarities between One Love, Mrs. Rita Marley and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and how the women built legacies for their husbands and their children, grandchildren, and a legacy that will live on in perpetuity, and how much work went into that when you don't naturally have the network, social network, to build structures and monuments of that kind, because you're not born into that level of society, and you have to work your way into it. So yes, that's my take. I liked the movie. There's a part in the movie where Rita has an emotional outburst or breakdown of Bob and his kids, and the number of children that he has had, and how he has stayed away from her so long, and how she needed companionship, and told him, all of these cars and houses mean nothing without love and companionship. And because the media made it seem like she was okay with, his affairs, all the children that he had outside of their marriage, then the media made it seem like she was okay with that, when that movie definitely tells a different story. and she could see that he was slipping away from her by the lights, the cameras, the celebrity, the women. She was losing her husband, and the movie showed that in one particular scene. So I don't want to give it all away. But yes, that's my take. And let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to this channel. I have Affirmation Journals on Amazon. And if you'd like a free dating guide, email me at thehypergamistjourney@gmail.com and I will get it to you right away. And April 21, we're going live. April 21, 2024, I'm going to be live. See you in the next video. Bye.